Welcome to my messy library. Let's talk about writing. So with the month of October already started, I have been working really hard on building up my plan for NaNoWriMo in November. Now, if you've never heard of it, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, a month where people from across the globe all get together online and try to write 50,000 words into a story that they've likely planned or had an idea for over the course of just 30 days. Now, the feat of completing NaNoWriMo is really difficult. I've been trying since, I think, the 10th grade to win NaNoWriMo, and I think I've achieved it twice over the course of the 12 or 13 years that I've been trying. So it's really important to get started on the right foot from what I have experienced in the few years I've won NaNoWriMo. It's really important to get started on the right foot and to have the right amount of planning under your belt and know enough about your story to really get started. And so I'm using the month of October to help me really plan and really get a good understanding of what the story is going to look like and how I am going to explore the ideas that are really important to me in this plot line. So I'm really excited to talk to you about everything I plan to do in October, or Preptober, to get ready to write my novel. So for the month of October this year, I plan to start from the very basic of what a story is to me and the very basic and most interesting part of the story. So my plan will start with writing character sketches and exploring the characters that I plan to include in my story. So this will be in the form of character sketches or character bios, and those have about 4 or 5 main parts, and I'll try to outline each of those here. So the first really important part of a character sketch is the character's information. So the character's name, where they live, their age, and any sort of quirks and tics with their personality, things that are really important to know about people. So like a quirk for me would be that I love to read, or that I play guitar, or, you know, I tend to prefer physical books over ebooks. Those are really important things to me as a person. So those would be things that you would list under my quirks. It would be really important to make sure you're finding the quirks that are important to the actual story that you plan to tell. So if you were telling a story about me going on an adventure with people into, you know, the desert, the likelihood is you don't need to know that I play guitar or that I prefer physical books over ebooks, but maybe you could incorporate those in the story somehow if that was in your plan. But a lot of the story that I plan to tell this year is about how people are interacting with each other. So the main thing in the quirks are going to be how a character responds to certain input from another person. So if a character is an introvert versus an extrovert, if they prefer texting to calling, if they have really negative reactions or a lot of jealousy around someone's, you know, a romantic partner's interaction with other people. Those are going to be the kind of quirks and important features of someone's personality that I'm going to be outlining in a character bio. The second piece of the character bio is going to be the character's backstory. This is usually in the form of just kind of a long couple of paragraphs that I will write that tell the story of the character and how the character has interacted with the important plot points up until when the story starts. Sort of the how did we get here story of this character. So once I've built up all of my character information, I will start building out my setting and sort of the milieu of the story, as some would call it. So getting the look and feel and the understanding of what room a character will be in and how a character will interact with their surroundings. Knowing all of those things is really important to knowing and understanding the setting and how you plan to convey the setting. So in the story that I'm planning this year, I've got several really important settings that I want to outline. I want to probably do a little sketch. I'm not an artist by any means, but I'll likely put together a sketch, look for reference pictures on the internet, and put together a folder of kind of what I think, you know, this character's home will look like and some of the other places that they plan to be in the story. The reason that I do the character sketches beforehand is because likely I'll find new places that I'll need them to interact with each other, and the settings will take more shape once I know what the characters need from those settings. So knowing that a character they'll really need to have this really big family interaction in part of the story, because they'd had this, I want to mirror something that happened in the past. Knowing that before I start building the settings allows me to make sure I've taken into account most of the settings that I'll need in the story. Of course, I'll find new ones. I always do. I'm definitely a discovery writer in that way, that I end up with, you know, maybe 1.5 times the scenes and settings that I set out for, and that's okay. But it's important to me that I have a good idea of the areas that I'm walking into, kind of like building a set for a movie, so that I can kind of plan for the plot, which is the next piece that I'll be covering, what a character will be doing in that space. Now, the third part of a story is the traditional thing that you think of when you think of planning a story, and that's writing the plot. I generally have a good 25% when I write my character sketches done. I have a good idea of the first 25% of the story. Now, when I get past the character sketches and all of the setting building, that's when I'll start writing out individual scene cards for the things that I know will be happening. And by the end of the process, my goal is always to have a card, which I write on usually these post-it notes that are lined. I'll write the scene description on the front, and then I'll generally write a little bit about like the characters on the back. And by the time I'm done with my plot and my Preptober, I'd like to have a card for almost every scene that I think will be happening in the story. So I tend to use something like a beat sheet to try to take my idea and give it some shape. I don't generally write things to like Save the Cat, which is a beat sheet outline. I don't tend to write 2 outlines or 2 beat sheets, but I tend to use them as inspiration to kind of know if I'm feeling a little bit lost in the scenes that I plan to happen, kind of know what should be happening next, or get ideas of things that I could kind of incorporate into the next scene to kick the action further. So I tend to do this in a whole handful of different steps, and it seems a little counterintuitive, but it's kind of a discovery process. So I will start with writing out an outline, just like a bullet pointed or a numbered outline, where I'll go through and say, okay, I'm going to have the characters do this in this place in this scene. And I'll write that all the way through as far as I can get through. In this case, I will be trying my very best to get through the end in the first pass. Then once I've got that numbered sheet of, 30 or so, maybe 50 scenes that I plan to write, I'll take those scenes and I'll write them on index cards, and then take those index cards and kind of organize them. And that's going to be really important, because usually the scenes happen chronologically in my mind when I'm writing that outline, and by the end, I've decided that that's not the right order for them to be in. And to keep things flowing, I'll probably write them out first and then reorganize them later, so that I don't interrupt the flow and stop myself from getting to the end of the story. Now, I call these index cards scene sketches, because usually what I do is I write that description from my short description from my outline, and then I'll write a little bit more of a detailed description. So I take one sentence and turn it into a paragraph, and then I'll go into, I'll flip the back. I don't have any index cards nearby, but I'll flip to the back of the index card and write out what characters are involved, what has happened to the characters beforehand, so the things that are impacting the character's mood and the way that the characters are interacting, and any important notes about time of day, things like that I'll need to know when I go into writing. So I call those scene sketches. It might not be the best term, but that's kind of my term for those cards. And I will take those cards then, and I'll kind of get them organized, and I will build a storyboard. So a storyboard for me looks a little bit like this. This is for an old story from the past. So I take the sort of paragraph-sized description of a scene that I've already written, and I convert it over to these little cards. They're the same ones I used earlier, sort of in the process. And I'll take that, the best, most refined description of a scene that I have thus far. I'll write it on one of these cards. Usually I'll use some sort of color coding depending on the kind of story. In this year's case, I do have 2 main characters and 2 point of view characters. So I will be taking different cards of different colors, and I will use them. They're sticky notes. So I will sticky note them onto this board in chronological order. Usually I go from top to bottom, and then from left to right across this board. I don't know my directions very well. My husband makes fun of me a lot for that. So I will start from top to bottom and from left to right, and I will use these to kind of guide my process. Now, this is the last act of refinement for my plot, and it also helps me to identify the flow. Usually when I'm putting these down, I'll notice oh, that transition from this scene to this scene doesn't really make all that much sense. Maybe I should add a scene, or maybe I should move these scenes around. So this is kind of the last pen to paper way for my plot to start adjusting and changing and get the pacing a little bit more accurate and a little bit more flowing before I actually start putting pen to the paper. So this will be the last week of October project for myself, where I write on each plot point and get it down onto my storyboard so that I can get really started writing. Then the last thing I'm going to do in Preptober is get my Scrivener file all ready. So I started using Scrivener, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I really love the app, actually. I think the software is really great. I think it worked really well. And now I don't have a really good way to organize files on my computer that relate to writing. I've spent so much time in the Scrivener ecosystem that I don't really have great ideas of other ways to do it. So I'm kind of locked in that way, but I really love Scrivener and I love what it provides. So I will be using Scrivener this year for my story. I've actually already started the file, which is kind of a base file. That's where I store all of my character sketches. I do write those on the computer generally because it's faster, and it gives me a lot more editing capabilities. So once I've got my plot sketch all up and ready on my storyboard, I'll take each of my plot points, each of these little index cards that I've written for the story, and I'll translate them into files in Scrivener. So each scene will get a file. I don't usually affiliate these with chapters at this point. Usually that's the first round of editing that I do after I've written a draft, is to move something into chapters. Unless by the end of this process I have a really good feeling of where chapter breaks should be, then I will, but that really depends on the story that I'm writing. So I will take each of those, I will turn them into files in Scrivener, and I will add the description from both the index card and from the sticky note that is on my storyboard. And once I've got all of those things into Scrivener and I have my outline and I have everything ready, I've usually color-coded things in Scrivener as well. So I'll add a little screenshot here, but Scrivener has a couple of ways that you can associate cards with like storylines or plot lines. So my plan this year is to use those to identify which main character is in control in that scene of the story, and that'll be really important to me when I start writing. But this will actually be my first time writing a story that is contemporary and is also dual point of view. I've never tried that before. So I might get halfway through the planning process and decide against it and decide to go with one main character, and that's totally cool. So if I don't end up using the 2 main characters to identify my plots, I might use things like the main plot line, and any subplots might be my different colored notations in my index cards. But I really like to use those to kind of get my head wrapped around very quickly what I'm writing about when I sit down to write. So once I have all of my scene cards written, I have all of my post-it notes written out, I've got all of the index cards in Scrivener, and I've got my character bios, I've got my settings, I'm really ready to write. And one of my favorite parts of writing is really setting the scene for myself. So something else I'll be doing in October is really putting together an area for myself to write where I can relax, I can have all of my favorite senses in the room. So my favorite smells and, you know, my favorite blankets, things that I like to have around me when I'm writing. Those are going to be really important, especially in November, because the act of writing 50,000 words in a month takes a lot of concentration and a very quick ability to switch contexts. So of course, during the month of November, I will still be working a full-time job. I'll still be a mom. I'll still be, you know, keeping up with my housework. I'll still be reading in my free time. So there's a lot of things that I'll have to kind of context switch in and out of as the day goes through in order to make sure I have about 1.5 hours to 2 hours of writing time every day, which right now that will be probably taking from some of my reading time, and that's okay. It's important to both read and write. If you want to be a writer, you have to know what you plan to do. Same if you want to be a filmmaker, you have to watch movies. So reading is really an important part of the writing process too. So I will still be reading throughout the month, and some of the time will likely come from there. But the closer I get, the more I'll understand what my schedule will look like. And that will be the sort of the last piece of Preptober, putting together a schedule and putting together a really great writing place where I can feel comfortable and at home and ready to write at any second. So thanks for watching my guide on how I plan to use Preptober to plan my plot for NaNoWriMo this year in 2021. I'm really excited. I kind of took a break from writing over the summer because I had a lot of stuff going on. I was learning a lot. I was learning some new skills for my job. So I'm really excited to get back to really writing a story, a novel, because I've written a lot of short stories recently, and that's fun, but there's nothing to me like writing a whole novel and writing out an experience, a way for someone to escape their life and get into the eyes of someone who is hopefully different from them in some way, so that they can see and learn and enjoy being outside of themselves. And I think that's a really important thing that books provide us, and I'm excited to provide, hopefully someday provide that experience for someone else. So that is how I plan my story for October. But that's how I plan to plan my story this October, and sort of a little glimpse of what NaNoWriMo is going to look like. This year for NaNoWriMo, I will likely be giving weekly updates with my reading updates, where I can tell you a little bit about how many words I've written, how I've found the process thus far, how things are changing, and if I prepped well enough. And I'll try to do at the end of November a little Preptober, how well did I do video, to give you a little glimpse into whether the process that I've outlined here really worked for me, because this year it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going more in depth with plot than I ever have before, and I think it's going to really help, but you just never know until you get in there. So that is the outline for what I'm doing in October and how I plan to prep my novel for NaNoWriMo. I hope you really enjoyed it. You can follow me on Goodreads if you'd like to see my reading progress. Hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up to tell me you really like this video. If you did, I hope you did, and feel free to leave a comment below and give me any advice you have on how you think NaNoWriMo planning should go, or general plot planning or novel planning should go. Let me know what you want to know about my process, what things I could illuminate for you about writing, and how to balance writing with all of these other things that I do in my life. And just let me know in general if you have any questions. Give it all in the comments below. I love to chat with you, and I will definitely be around listening. So let me know. Have a great week, a great October, and I'll see you next time.